Hello and welcome to a Heartland exclusive interview. I'm Christina Herrin and Government Relations Manager at the Heartland Institute. Today's guest is Daniel Savickas, Regulatory Policy Manager at FreedomWorks. Thank you for joining me today, Dan, and talking about FreedomWorks' Most Favored Nations Drug Pricing Scorecard.
Yeah, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. To start off, I would just like to talk with you a little bit about the background of the Most Favored Nations policy proposed by the administration and what your thoughts are on the overall policy proposal.
Yeah, so some background for people who are listening in. A couple years ago, the administration tried to implement what they call the IPI, or the International Price Index, where they tie drug prices in Medicare to prices that are offered overseas, namely most European Union countries, plus Canada and Australia, and a select few others. And now they're going forward with what Christina called the Most Favored Nation proposal, and that's how the White House is branding it as well, saying that not only should the White House and the Medicare program look to other countries to set its drug prices, that the United States should have the lowest drug prices of any of these countries. In other words, this is implementing a price control that's stricter than anywhere else in the rest of the world. And I will use this metaphor. I've used it every time I talk about it, that if you have your check engine light on your car, if you shut off the light, that doesn't mean there's still not a problem with your engine. There are plenty of problems with the American healthcare system that have caused the rise in prescription drug prices, but price controls are not going to fix it. They're just going to leave the underlying problem there and just create far more market distortions.
Yeah, well, thanks for that kind of background on the proposal. So, as you probably know, healthcare is one of the number one issues to voters across the political spectrum. And we've seen policy proposals from both sides of the aisle to lower prescription drug prices in the past. And you mentioned that some of these proposals are circling around price controls, and others have, promoted more free market solutions that put healthcare back in the hands of the consumer. How does the MFN impact the consumer, and do you think it would actually help to lower drug prices? Even if it is in some capacity of price control, do you think it would help to lower the cost?
I think it might help to lower the cost. It might also drastically decrease access. And that's what the scorecard that FreedomWorks put out kind of goes to show. And I'm sure we'll talk about plenty later, that countries that do have price controls, like what the White House is proposing, they have problems with access to new medicines, decreased innovation and investment in the pharmaceutical sector. So there are a lot of problems that come along with it. And it would be kind of like putting price controls on food to try and decrease the costs of the food stamp program or decrease the hunger rate in the United States. If you put price controls on food, or any product for that matter, the result is not just that everything all of a sudden becomes cheaper, it's that production slows down because there's no more supply to meet the demand anymore. So yes, you might get a price decrease, but you're also going to get a significant production and investment decrease. And that's going to cause a whole nother set of problems. And I think it was Milton Friedman who said that the costliest prescription drug is the one that you can't get access to. That's the most dangerous one to any consumer. And I know Heartland's done a lot of work on some of the reasons why it costs so much to develop drugs in the United States, but price controls are certainly not the solution.
Okay, thank you for that. And in regard to the scorecard that you mentioned, just because our audience might not exactly be aware of what that is, can you kind of break that down, all the aspects to the scorecard and any highlights from the findings?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our scorecard, we grade the 16 countries. The criteria in the White House's executive order was an OECD nation with comparable GDP to the United States. And that's tricky because there aren't a whole ton of OECD nations that actually have GDPs that come anywhere close to the United States. So the standard we used was roughly at least 60% of the US GDP. We use those 16 countries in the OECD that do have a GDP at least 60% of the United States, GDP per capita, that is. And we graded them on 4 different criteria. Do they have reduced access to medications as determined by nations that have access to fewer than 3/4 of new drugs made available in the United States? So at least a quarter of the drugs available in the United States are not available in these countries. And one of the things we found was that all 16 of those countries have access to fewer than 75% of the drugs available in the United States. That means they're not coming to market. That means consumers have to either wait for access or don't have access at all to these medications, and they have to go product shopping elsewhere. We found that 11 of the countries have long wait times for health services. The problems with that price controls cause are not just limited to prescription drugs. They have ripple effects to the rest of the market. And that's why a lot of people have long wait times for surgeries. And this is evidenced by the third criteria, equipment shortages. 12 of the 16 countries had equipment shortages. They're very short on MRI machines, scanning machines, medical equipment that they need. That's what happens when you tax the healthcare system and strip it of investment and resources. You're going to see problems outside prescription drugs. And then probably the most concerning thing in the scorecard is that 7 of these countries have avowedly socialist single-payer systems. And this is pretty concerning coming from an administration that said America will never be a socialist nation, and then turns around about a year and a half later and says, let's tie drug prices in the United States on at least 7 socialist nations and think that we're going to improve from that. They're sending mixed signals to everybody. You and I included. I'm confused.
Okay. And if not the MFN, what would FreedomWorks suggest as a solution to drug pricing? I mean, drug prices are seriously increasing, and COVID, you mentioned, the shortages in supplies and, hospitals and things like that. And I think we've really taken note of that in the free market world during COVID. It pointed out a lot of flaws in our system. So the MFN is an option that maybe free market folks aren't supportive of. Mm-hmm. So across the board, healthcare costs are rising. If not the MFN, what other areas could be improved to lower costs? And, what are your thoughts on other improvements that could?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because a lot of people look at us saying that this MFN is a bad idea and saying that we stand for nothing and that we think the status quo is fine. And that's not the case at all. I know, Christina, you and I have talked about free to choose medicine. And I think there are a lot of free market things we can do to decrease the financial burden that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, puts on the free market. And that's why it costs so much in the United States to develop new cures and get them to market. I think you can look at some of the problems with our patent system and the way that monopolies are allowed to extend almost in perpetuity, even though you're only supposed to get 10 years. There are some games played with the system, and government granted monopolies that allows prices to rise without competition. That's something we can look at. We can look at pharmacy benefit managers and the anti-competitive laws that pretty much allow them to pocket discounts that don't go along to consumers that are supposed to go along to consumers. And the law currently protects them and allows them to be able to do that. The administration had a reform proposal on these pharmacy benefit managers on the table and decided to go this route instead. Would much rather see them go the other way. But there are plenty of things that we can do, and we can focus more on health savings accounts, allowing people to price shop and create more price sensitivity in the market, which would drive competition and drive prices down. There are so many things from a free market perspective that we can do that we just haven't done because there's just such an appetite for something like price controls, because it seems easier to market to just say, yes, we're going to drive the prices down and we're just going to mandate by law that they be lower, which sounds good at face value, but when you actually think about it, that's not going to get you where you need to go. So I think a lot of our leaders need to sit down and in a bipartisan fashion, a lot of the things that I've talked about have bipartisan support. If you talk about this in a bipartisan fashion, we can get this done. It's not as pithy as price controls, but it's going to be a more lasting solution.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your input on that, and mentioning this regulatory capture issue and the monopolies that are in place right now. And we do have a problem, and I know we all are looking for solutions. So definitely looking for solutions that work across the board and are bipartisan would be ideal. It's hard to get things done in Washington, though.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience in regard to healthcare policy in general, or any work FreedomWorks is doing?
Yeah, I'd encourage you first to get involved. I think that's the reason why we're looking at price controls right now, and why a lot of people in Washington are going that route, is because they just hear people complaining about healthcare. And like you said, it's the number one issue for a lot of people across the United States. If you make your voice heard and say that this needs to be addressed in a way that's not going to make our healthcare system, like these 16 nations in our scorecard, not inherit those problems, that also needs to be communicated. Because if the problem that's being communicated is just that there's a problem, fix it fast, you're going to get a ham-fisted solution like price controls. So I'd communicate the problems that we see in Europe to your elected representative. Write the White House, call, tweet, do whatever it is that you can do to be involved, and check out resources like the scorecard. You can find that and so much more. Our website, freedomworks.org. Christina, as a fellow FW alum, we do a lot of good Facebook live streams like the one we're doing right now on FreedomWorks' Facebook page. We have so much content. We have a video series called Fix Patients, Not Prices, that talks about exactly this issue. Get informed, get involved, and make your voice heard, because otherwise the squeaky wheels are going to be the socialists on the left, and they're going to be the ones who get the grease. And that's not what we want to see at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And we'll definitely make sure to link the scorecard below for those of you that are watching and either listening on a podcast. So thanks again, Daniel, for taking time to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to see you.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and consider donating to the Heartland Institute to support more vibrant free markets, greater individual liberties, and more videos like this one.